Thanks everyone for bearing with me. Now, have a look at the unique side of political governance in ancient China, and I mean, there are many different technical differences between Chinese governance and other governance type. But today we're going to look at the philosophical side of Chinese governance, which is uh, ethical governance in particular. Now, it may sound a bit high level or arbitrary or invisible, um, but we're going to learn how to apply some of the ancient teachings in solving real life problems. It's not arbitrary because, as the title suggests, ethical governance is based on education. Okay, and there are two significances about the title here. Now, the first is, of course, ethical. And we can understand this in two different ways. One is the ultimate goal of governance, which is to make the society an ethical society, right? And you can say that, well, the goal is to make it technologically advanced. That's okay, but in this particular case, we want to make the society ethical. So it's about the elevation of human development along the direction of ethics, isn't it? And I think because I come from a finance background originally, and I think a society that is economically prosperous but ethically inferior is not really a successful society. It's half baked, and in fact, it is a society full of competition and pain, I would say, right? But I think we all watched the movie Wall Street by Michael Douglas, yeah, where the main character Gordon Gekko said greed is good. Well, from an economic perspective, it is useful, I have to say, but there's more to that, right? There's a lot of negative externality associated with greed, and that is not good. Um, and I think that throughout the cause of ancient Chinese civilization, ethics is the ultimate goal of governance. It always has been. And also, ethics is about the conduct and moral standard of a government itself. A government that uses ethics as a guideline to manage the business is more successful and more efficient than a government that is, let's say, disregards ethical conduct. So ethic is absolutely the first significance of this title. Now, the second significance of this title is education. As you can see, we well, the Chinese care very much about education. And in modern China, Chinese parents spare no money, absolutely no money on the kids' education. But we can discuss whether or not it's too much or not. But education is definitely the first thing in the family. Now, in traditional culture, education is not only a governmental department, okay, the Ministry of Department, but is also the ultimate tool for governing itself. Now, very different from regulation and law, as you will see in a minute, education, in particular, uh, ethical, ethical education can be used to reduce crime, to correct social value, to achieve solidarity among people, to increase government efficiency, to, let's say, achieve world peace eventually. Okay, so in traditional culture, education focuses very much on the ethical side of human life rather than um, technology. And education is not only about obtaining a graduation certificate, I should say, but also about maintaining a mentally rich life. Um, but I don't think this is unique to the Chinese culture, right? In all human societies, we find that ethical education is an important way to elevate living standard and promote social harmony. So um, I think the teaching of traditional Chinese culture is not only useful to the Chinese, but also to many people around the world, regardless of the cultural background, okay, and chosen political structure. So now, having understood the two fundamental concepts of governance, we'll now begin our seminar. And the first question we want to ask is just in order to achieve a good governance, if there's one thing we should focus on, what is it? right? What should we focus on to achieve a good governance? Is it political structure? Is it certain economic theory? I don't know if you have learned some economics before. Is it neoclassical or Keynesian or neoliberalism, whatever? Or is it individuals of the government? Is that, most important? Well, this a particular book called The Governing Principles of Ancient China, or The Essentials of Governance, put a much more emphasis on the person running the government, the guy running government, than the chosen structure itself. Now, in other words, the structure can either be improved or not improved, right? It can be good and bad. But if the chosen person, the guy sitting on the top, isn't the right person, the structure can be exploited to hurt the interest of the people. Okay, so the point is not about the structure, it's about who is running it. Okay, that's my point. Now, this is such an important point, and I think it warrants a lot more explanation. Now, there are many different ways to elaborate the importance of the person in charge, but I think the easiest way is to examine the cause of corruption, right? Because corruption is generally about human behavior and is such an important problem in the government. And we can say that among all the government failure, corruption is the most damaging behavior because it basically impairs all the positive efforts of government work, right? So, what is corruption? Well, corruption can be defined as fraudulent or dishonest conduct by those in power. Yeah, if you don't have power, then you can't corrupt. Yeah. So the first, I think ever since the first person walked the earth, there have been corruption. Okay. So there are 3 points about corruption. In other words, three conditions of corruption. They are selfish thought. Okay, you have to be selfish to corrupt, or personal desire. They're basically the same thing sometimes. Another condition is the power of the person. And lastly, insufficient oversight or incomplete oversight. So let's have a look at these conditions in more detail. So just bear in mind, our point here is to examine whether ethics can improve government work, okay, through the channel of reducing corruption. Now, we can largely divide condition into two groups, these 3 conditions. One is how to corrupt, and the other is why corrupt. Okay, one is the channel, and the other is the motivation. Power and authority, they are important conditions that enable someone to corrupt. Okay, and it involves, let's say, personal network, personal resources, etc. But the question is power definitely going to lead to the action of corruption, the result of corruption? Well, I would say not necessarily. I think we know a lot of powerful government leaders or government officials who are not corrupted, right? They are very good. And quite the contrary, they use their power to promote economic prosperity and social harmony. So power is only a potential condition of corruption, but it's not a sufficient condition. Okay, and also power itself is neutral. Okay, a lot of people, talk about power from in a negative tone. I think it's not necessary because power is neutral. It is the person who wields the power that matters. Okay, so power can be used to benefit the people or to destroy social order. Now, what about oversight? Okay, what about oversight, the one in the middle? Well, someone may say, no matter how powerful a person is, as long as we design a better oversight system, and then there will be no problem, no corruption. Well, that may be right. And in fact, this is what many regulators have been working on so hard. But let me give you an example about corporate governance. Okay. Corporate governance is the study that examines the mechanisms that align the interest between the corporate managers and shareholders, and to monitor managerial behavior and things like that. Okay. And in doing so, corporations and companies have invented what is called performance-linked equity compensation for the top executives, the CEOs and CFOs. Okay, performance-linked equity compensation. Now, in particular, companies issue what is called the share option to executives, okay, which only vest in a few years' time. After that, the executives can exercise the option and collect the profit. Okay. Now, because the exercise price of the option is set at the value that is equal to the share price at the time the options are issued, if the value of the company increases during the vesting period, and as you can imagine, the executives can make an immediate profit by exercising the option. And this is no problem with that, right? It basically motivates the executives to work hard and maximize the company's value. That is good from an economic perspective. However, in recent years, finance researchers find that executives backdate the options. Okay, so what they do is that after the options have been issued, they change the issue date of the option in a way that they can profit upon exercising the option is almost guaranteed. Okay, so that is cheating, right? That completely eliminates the incentive effect of stock options. So my point is that a good system can be manipulated and leads to corruption-like behavior. Okay, the better the system, the more or the cleverer the anti-oversight behavior. Okay, it's a bit like martial arts competition, right? No matter how clever the attack, there's always a way to intercept the attack and counterattack. So, as an external condition, incomplete oversight is also not a sufficient condition of corruption, unfortunately. Okay. Now, in our discussion about the two factors of corruption, one thing in common so far is that the person must have the intention to corrupt in the first place. This guy must have the intention to change the issue date of the option, let's say. Okay, because without the option, without the intention, without the willingness to practice corruption, corruption simply won't happen. It won't take place, right? So this is what we call the internal condition of corruption. The internal condition of corruption. And this intention can come from certain selfish mentality or uncontrolled desire. You might say these are the same thing, okay? The point is, if desire is somehow under control and morality is maintained, even under very loose supervision and with great power, the person simply won't practice corruption. Okay? Everyone is selfish to some degree, unless you are a saint. So the point is, you must be able to restrain it. Okay. So now we can say something about the relative importance among the three factors of corruption so far. It is very clear to me, at least, that the internal factor is more fundamental than the external factors. And we're not saying that they're not important, but we're saying that on a relative basis, the internal factor is the key. We can say is a final defense, if you like. So we can also say that the leader's moral compass and a sense of responsibility is very important to successful governance. Okay. And that is, you can say there's the governance of the company or even the country. Okay. It's more important than structure, more important than power given to the leader. Okay. Now, well, sometimes it's easier to talk about regulation than personal cultivation of the leader. Okay, it's always easier to work on the law, to work on the regulation, to work on uh, you know, supervision than personal cultivation. And also, much more effort has been put into the improvement of government structure and oversight mechanism. And we barely hear anything about the improvement of the ethical standard of the leaders. Okay. So I think we must go one step further to understand why ethics is important, right? Why can't we just rely on regulation oversight alone? Okay. Now, to do this, we now turn our attention to the teaching of the book called The Governing Principles of Ancient China, which I have mentioned earlier. And I think we also, if I'm, please correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly or Catherine, that we have a module on this book, about this book, right? The new BA program, I think. So it's going to be fantastic, I think.
It's correct. You're right.
Yeah. Okay, so firstly, let's have a look at the relationship between the leader and the regulation. Okay, so what is law? What is a law anyway? A law is the method by which justice is maintained. Okay, I'm not a lawyer, but I think this is the general concept of law. So it's the method of justice. Okay, but at the same time, the leader is the operator of the law, isn't he? Without the leader, the law doesn't do anything. The leader applies his intelligence to use the law to achieve certain purpose. And it can be anything. It can be promoting social behavior, deterring bad monopolistic behavior, or it could be used to appropriate public interest. Okay, it's like the relationship between the car and the driver. It's the driver who makes the decision to drive safely or in a dangerous manner, not the car, unless it's Tesla, I think. Now, in not even Tesla can do that. Now, in book 38, or scroll 38 of Governing Principles of Ancient China, a philosopher Xunzi made it very clear that there is the leader who leads the country into chaos, but no such law that leads the country into demise. Okay. And because I think it's so important, I like to just take a couple of minutes to read the paragraph for you in its entirety. Xunzi said that there are no such thing as chaotic countries, but just countries with corrupted leaders or rulers. There are no such things as efficient policies that can keep a country safe and peaceful without the wise rulership of worthy people. Thus, a virtuous leader is eager to find the superior man who can help him to govern well, while an unwise leader is only eager to gain power. With a superior man serving in his administration, the ruler is able to relax and enjoy a peaceful and orderly country. He would also gain great reputation for being a good ruler. On the a ruler who is eager to gain power will exhaust his energy and throw the country into chaos. Not only will he jeopardize his career, but also bring disgrace to himself. Okay. And what's interesting is that Xunzi was a philosopher of the school of legalism. Okay. So the law provides the basis, but the men of noble characters, the superior men, put them into practice. And without the latter, not even the well-designed law can prevent social upheaval. Okay. And now we have talked about, we've been saying that the leader's morality is very crucial to the fate of the government and certainly the tendency of corruption. But by no means do we undermine the importance of law and regulation. We emphasize ethics, but it's not the same as moral idealism. Okay, we still need the regulation to protect ethics. In particular, it protects the outcome of ethical education. For example, again, in finance, ethics means taking responsibility in managing the client's money. Okay. And as a money manager, you need to inform the investors about the risk of the market, educate the investors about the problem of irrational trading, and things like that. And this is in the spirit of righteousness. But if there is no financial regulation, I think many fund managers may mislead investors and make a lot of commission income by introducing risky financial products. And if you don't do the same, you may be fired by your own investment company because everybody else is doing it. Okay, so not only will your ethical superiority satirized by other industry practitioners, by your peers, but it may also hinder your own career. And in turn, under great pressure, it simply becomes extremely difficult for you to maintain a high level of morality. Okay, I mean, let's face it. So the protection function of law on ethics is actually very, very important. And of course, ethics supports the spirit of law and regulation. Okay. Now, another difference between ethics and regulation is that they function differently. Okay, they function very differently. Although both things deter crime, they work differently in terms of the timing. Ethics prevents crime before it takes place. Okay, it's an ex ante preventative measure. This is because people are bounded by moral compass, right, and a sense of justice. But law and regulation largely punish the crime after it is committed. It's an ex post punitive measure, okay, and it only deters crime by sending an alert to the public with the punishment. Now, if I ask you, what is the better scenario? Well, there's an easy answer, isn't it? Um, it is where the provision of punishment exists, but it never has to be say. Okay, you don't mind about the existence of punishment, but let's hope it does. Let's hope it is never used because people are self-disciplined, and that comes from the effective moral education and human development. Okay, so all in all, we're not done yet, by the way. All in all, I think it's fair to say that ethics is the root of governance. Okay, it's fundamental to governance, and when it comes to eradicating corruption, ethics deal with the root cause of the corruption, with the teaching of righteousness, sense of responsibility, and a sense of justice. Law, on the other hand, unifies actions. It's still needed, but it unifies actions. And different people may have different opinions about things. So law makes it easier to manage the country by laying down a set of unified guidance, the do's and don'ts for people to follow, right? Now, having understood, we're halfway through already, so don't worry. Now, having understood the relationship between ethics and law, we can now explain why ethics should be given the priority. Okay, it's because a good regulation can only be made by people who are ethically superior. Okay, in Book 17, the Book of Han, the Book of the Han Dynasty in the Governing Principles of Ancient China, it says that a sage ruler would never wage a personal vendetta at the expense of public justice when making law and regulation. So when this person is making the law, it's just about justice. It's only about justice. It's not for the purpose of protecting his own interest group. Okay. Now, a deeper meaning of this is that the only benchmark of lawmaking should be ethics. Okay. That's the only thing you should look at when you make the law. Now, in Chinese philosophy, the benchmark is benevolence and righteousness, by and large. And in fact, benevolence and righteousness are very closely related to lawmaking than you might think it is. For example, when lawmakers make financial regulations, sometimes there is pressure from certain interest groups that force the lawmakers to deregulate the financial market, okay, because they don't like it. Now, what is financial deregulation? Well, basically, it allows for wider scope of business making by financial service companies, and potentially higher profit. And for the consumers, there may be better access to certain financial products. So it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. But when benevolence and righteousness come into play, there are more to consider. More to consider. Okay. For example, a benevolent financial lawmaker takes into account of the dark side of human habit. What is it? Well, uncontrolled desire of making quick money, as an example, right? Now, this desire leads to deceitful financial conduct, misleading information to clients, and sometimes simply cheating. Some of you may have heard about the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, where thousands of pensioners lost their lifetime saving by acting on misleading information. And I was in the middle of it, and it was a complete bloodbath. We're not saying that financial deregulation will always lead to such a bad result. Like I said, it's not a bad thing on its own. But we can certainly say that deregulation, at least 2002 to 2008 deregulation, did not take into account of all the potential human flaws. And the only consideration was profitability, unfortunately. Okay. Now, another implication about ethics in lawmaking is law and regulation must be easily understood. They cannot be too complicated. Now, this sounds obvious, doesn't it? But from an ethical perspective, confusing regulations can lead to social chaos. Okay. Now, obviously, it's not the intention of the lawmakers to confuse people on purpose, but sometimes they are reluctant to make unambiguous regulations. Now, let me give an example. You might still remember the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. Okay. During the pandemic, people sometimes find the government giving confusing signals about social distancing. Okay, you don't know what to do, essentially. On the one hand, it seems that the government wants to maintain certain level of social autonomy, and try not to be viewed as a tough government, right? They want to maintain a good image. But on the other hand, the rising number of infection and death put increasing pressure on a stricter social distancing rule. Now, under this circumstance, then just imagine if you were in the shoes of the government officials, what should the government do? Right? What is the priority in this particular scenario? Should the government continue this ambiguity and maintain a rather liberal image? Or should the government issue very clear social distancing rule until the infection rate drops significantly? Now, that's the question. I think at this point, I can say that righteousness and benevolence, they don't mean that the government will never get blamed by the general public. That's what the government does, get blamed. But these considerations do encourage the government to think more carefully about what is right for the people. It's very similar to a situation where parents have to make a tough decision for the children, right? And these children's these decisions may not be welcomed by the children in the short term, but can prove quite beneficial in the long term. Interestingly, book 35 of the governing principle describe how a superior man make choices. And it says that holding a vast territory with the left hand and slitting his own throat with the right hand is something not even a fool would do. For human life is much more precious than winning over the world. However, a man who could sacrifice his life to save the ruler and his own parents from danger values righteousness more than his own life. Okay, so this shows that a superior man, an ethically superior man, doesn't care how the ruler or the people see him, but whether or not he does the right thing. Okay, and of course, ethics is not is not only relevant to lawmaking, but also governance in general. Um, the governing principle emphasizes that when forming the government cabinet, ethics and virtue should drive the selection of the candidates. Okay, but more importantly, the leader must be virtuous himself. And the idea is this: by being virtuous, this leader will attract equally virtuous and abled and talented candidates. Okay, and that's because virtuous candidates are not only attracted by financial reward or salary, but also by a high level of ethical superiority of the leader. Okay. Um, so in this regard, the very famous Scottish philosopher Alistair MacIntyre raised a very important point here. He said, no matter how perfect or detailed the ethical principles are, if people do not possess the necessary ethical traits and virtue, then these principles simply won't work. And he said, no matter how close the relationship is between virtue and law, with respect to the utility or application of law, it only functions well for those who are righteous. Okay, so this means that a fair or a good governing system can only be designed by a good person, a virtuous person, and only a virtuous person can implement the system properly. So again, right, coming back to our point, ethical standard of a person in charge is much more important than the system itself. Okay. Now, we know that ethics is important. So I think the next question is, how do we promote ethics in the system of governance? How do we actually improve it? Why did the ancient Chinese emphasize on ethical education, but seldomly practical skills? They seldomly mention practical skills. Well, this, I think, reflects the modern problem as well. Okay. In reality, oftentimes we emphasize a lot on knowledge acquisition, the knowledge acquisition side of education, right? How much you know, how many books you've read, okay, how many experiments you've done, but we give very little weight to morality. Okay, again, taking financial education as an example, because that's my original background, which I think quite a few about. If we have a look at the curriculum of undergraduate and postgraduate accounting and finance programs, I can tell you that financial ethics takes no more than 5% of the syllabus. There's nothing. And I don't think it's a coincidence, as we witness increasingly frequent financial misconduct and crisis in the last few decades. For example, we all know the Enron accounting scandal in 2001. Okay, if you don't know about that it's okay. Just Google it later. The Enron case was known by almost everybody on the planet Earth back then in 2001, and it's been taken as a case study of unethical financial conduct. But that was 2001. However, the biggest financial crisis that shocked the world took place in 2008. Just look at how close these two cases are, only 7 years apart, right? I mean, that is just funny. If you think about this, did people not remember what happened 7 years ago? Well, that's impossible. Of course they remember, but they just didn't care. So this is because our focus didn't change, right? And what is our focus? Is always profit making, always money making. Now, we must understand this, okay? Making money is not wrong. It's not wrong. It's promoted by, well, at least in ancient Chinese philosophy, it is encouraged, right? That's what the people should do to provide for the family. It's the obligation of a person who provides for the family. But our mistake was that we didn't understand the source of profit. Okay, so where does profit come from? Well, if we dig deeper into the ancient text, the Book of Rights outline the process of making money from a country leader's perspective. Okay, it says that first one must have a high standard of morality. That's the first thing, first step. Okay, step one. Now, with a high standard of morality, virtuous people will come to join the leader. And in modern term, that is called human capital. Okay, and thereby physical capital can be produced. For a country, this means that the territory is secured and stable. For a company, this could mean the intellectual capital, knowledge, research, innovation, etc. So these are physical capital or intangible or productive capital. But anyway, with these capital in place, things will be produced, and not just normal things, but useful things, useful products. Okay, and then we can call that wealth creation. Okay, with wealth creation, people can finally put them into good use and thereby raising the standard of living. Okay, so we'll just sort of interpret what is written in the Book of Rights in a modern term. So you can see that in Chinese philosophy, profit making or wealth come from, well, they come very late during the process of money making. Okay, and the root cause of wealth is in fact ethics. If you Google any financial crisis, okay, you can see the financial crisis demonstrate very clearly that without ethics, the previously created wealth will be eliminated, will be wiped out overnight. And in the long term, there's very little gain, right? There's nothing left. There's very little gain. There is a very interesting paragraph in the book of Mencius, also included in the Governing Principles of Ancient China, volume 37. It's an interesting conversation between King Hui of Liang and Mencius, okay, the king of the state of Liang. Now, Mencius, as many of you may know already, Mencius was the advisor to the king for a period of time, okay, and the king asked Mencius once, how do you propose to bring benefit to my country? Okay. Now, instead of giving the king a straight answer of profit making, which I think that was what the king expected, Mencius rejected the idea and said, Your Majesty shouldn't be talking about profit making as a king. Why? Because if the king talks about profit only, then the ministers and the rest of the government will be profit driven, naturally. And so will be the people in general. What's the result? What's bad about that? Well, this will lead to a widespread competitive mentality. If everybody in the country is fighting for their own interest, the country will be placed in danger. That's what Mencius said. So this demonstrates, again, the ideal sequence of governance. Moral education first, profit later. Okay? Now, you may wonder, how about law? How about law? Can we solve the social problems of financial misconduct by creating more stringent law and regulation? Can we do that? Well, yes, of course we can. And we should, right? We should. Remember, the governing principle says that we need law and regulation to protect ethics. But the sequence still matters. Okay, the sequence still matters. Now, if we put law above ethical education, if we put law first, we're likely we will likely face certain unintended consequences. And by unintended, we mean negative consequence. Okay, so let's talk about the certain potential problem here. The first potential problem is a change in people's mentality, a change in people's mentality, and that is shamelessness, the shamelessness in avoiding punishment. Okay, and to explain this, I like to quote from the Analects. It says that if people are only led by law and unified by punishment, what will they do? Well, they will try to avoid the punishment and feel no shame in doing so. In other words, they may feel pretty clever and proud for successfully dodging punishment, right? But if people are led by virtue and moral education and unified by the rule of rights or righteousness, then they will have the sense of shame and be willing to act in an ethical way. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Rights and proprieties are not law, okay, rules of propriety. They are instead a set of code of conduct, a set of code of social conduct that are in line with human nature and harmony. Okay, and these are not created out of the vacuum. Okay, this is proved experience. With more law being created, we may find more people engaging in finding loopholes and avoiding regulation, and inevitably being very proud of it. Okay, so the problem with this is that it opens the door to potentially more severe crimes. So it won't stop. It won't stop. It's a vicious cycle. Okay. So that's the first unintended consequence, because it's not really, it's not the intended consequence of lawmaking, isn't it? The second consequence is about what the law cannot do. Okay. It says that if people do not understand propriety and righteousness, the law will not be effective, because the law can sentence an unfilial son to death, but it cannot make people behave like Confucius or Zhengzi, who was a very filial son. The law can also sentence thieves and robbers to prison, but it cannot make people behave honestly. Okay. So in ancient China, the law could punish an unfilial son. That was documented. And there was specific law that punished people who were unfilial to their parents, such as not fulfilling their responsibility as a child, not supporting their parents, etc. And this was driven by the an overall pursuit of filial piety, okay, which is the core of traditional Chinese culture. But the governing principle raises the question that whether the law can produce filial piety in people's hearts. And the answer is unfortunately quite negative. No, it cannot. Well, maybe some unfilial people regret about their conduct and become willing to do good. But law and regulation themselves do not directly lead to an improvement of morality, unfortunately, and only deter crime and bad behavior through punishment. Okay, and the same principle goes to punishing the act of the theft. Okay, and things like that. So I'm going to skip this one because I think we're running out of time. Don't want to put you into sleep, but so let's conclude very quickly. We've talked a lot about the interaction and regulation, sorry, a relationship, okay, between education and law and regulation, and we have shown you why education is more important than the law. Okay, so the question is, what is the core principle that directs our ethical education? What is the core that directs our the theoretical deduction and summarizes our investigation? Well, I think the core principle is that the society is a reflection of the mind of the people. Okay, to put it differently, people's mindsets or mentality determines their action, and their action leads to a certain social outcome. So this means that the question of whether we can achieve social harmony ultimately depends on the mindset of the people. When people's minds are along the line of benevolence, righteousness, and of course, the society will not be very far from harmony, right? Very interestingly, the American judge in the 20th century, Learned Hand, shared a very similar view about the relative importance between people's moral compass and law. And I'd like to read this in full for you. Okay. He said, I often wonder whether we do not rest our hopes too much upon constitutions, upon laws, and upon thoughts. These are false hopes. Believe me, these are false hopes. Liberty lies in the hearts of men and women. When it dies here, no constitution, no law, no court can save it. No constitution, no law, no court can even do much to help it. What is this liberty that must lie in the hearts of men and women? It is not the ruthless, it's not the ruthless, the unbridled will. It is not the freedom to do as one likes. Okay, so this means that if people give up morality and the leader throws away ethics for private gain, the system or law will eventually become the tool that protects the interest groups. Okay, it sounds like a complicated problem, but just like all problems, there's always the root of it. And the governing principles throughout the entire 50 volumes emphasizes that the ultimate solution to achieve effective governance and social harmony is for the leader to demonstrate benevolence first, and that comes from education. Okay, so this concludes my talk, and I welcome any question. Thank you.